Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and thank you for stopping by again. So today's video is going to be a short one. This is going to be a very short one because there's really something that I want to discuss that I saw on Ezekiel's Instagram. So let's get into it. So off bat, I want to start by saying that I'm a huge Ezekiel fan. I am. He's one of my favorite poets. Even as a Christian influencer, I really enjoy what he, does with his platform. And to be honest, I'm a huge fan of the entire Poets in Autumn team. I think I've maybe seen them 2 or 3 times at this point, all the times that they've come to South Africa. So I'm a major fan. Jackie Hill Perry, honestly, wow. So I say all of that just to put the disclaimer out there to say that, this is someone who I'm a fan of, and this video isn't really talking about him or directed to him. It's just a couple of questions that I have. So a couple of days ago on his Instagram, Ezekiel put up a video, and in this video he's answering a question. So I'm going to play the video now and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, is the MeToo movement exposing the realities of widespread misogyny or just a scapegoat for a lack of sound judgment on the women's part? Who wrote these questions?
Can the MeToo movement be used as a scapegoat to mask a lack of sound judgment on the women's part? I guess my question to the question would be, what should a victim's response be when within a system that they are powerless in? How should their response be governed? Who should govern and dictate that response? So I think that's the greater question here. I've heard the statement a lot, Black people cannot be racist. But where's the threshold? You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, so does that give Black people the right to do this and to do that and to have the stance? If a stance is taken in the mode of self-preservation in response to overt, overwhelming oppression by a system that they did not create, like, who is anyone to judge that response? But then you got the other side of that, which, people blame the R. Kelly victims' parents. Like, yo, they should have known. They heard the rumors of this. They was all trying to get their checks, so they put their children in all these positions, so they should be thrown in jail with R. Kelly. I'm not going to go into that, but that's one frame of reference or a line of thinking. On the other side, you got people that would say, hey, they deserve to be taken advantage of because they shouldn't have been here, or they shouldn't have been wearing that, or they know their body is like this. And so you got that side of thinking. So there was a case, I think her name was Lorena Bobbitt. This woman, she chopped off her husband's joint because she claimed that he was, or alleged that he was domestically abusive. And I'm not saying she wasn't, it was just alleged. So alleged that he was domestically abusive all the way throughout that time. And in response, one day, she made love to him. And later on when he was asleep, she chopped off his joint. He woke up like, oh, my joint is gone. So it's kind of like that situation. So as the prosecution was dealing with this, they was like, man, how sinister do you have to be to go that route that's premeditated and all this? And then if you're speaking from the frame of a reference from a person who has gone through something like that for all that time, it's like, yes, fear can cause you to respond in particular ways. This is not an easy thing to just answer even for the believer, because Jesus on one side, it was like, hey, look, if someone hit you on this cheek, turn and give them the other cheek. Pray for those who persecute you, and bless your enemies, pray for your enemies, and all of that stuff. And on the other side of it, it's like, okay, Jesus is the advocate for anyone who is downtrodden, marginalized, looked over. He was even in the midst of people who about to get persecuted. Like, yo, don't throw these stones. Like, this is my people. Like, Jesus's people are those who are victims. How do you dictate, the response after long-term oppression, abuse, or whatever the case may be? And so this question I'm posing to you, because I'm not going to answer it. I just want you to deal with these ideas.
Yikes. So Ezekiel has this card game. It's like an interactive game, and it's called The Whole Truth. I'm pretty sure it's also the name of like a series that he's doing on his YouTube channel about dating and things like that. It's called The Whole Truth. The purpose of this interactive game, according to the website, is that it's supposed to foster these deep conversations, you know, and it's supposed to be fun for Christians everywhere, and that ideally it's the kind of game that you can play with friends, you know, people that you're dating. And I understand that the whole point of it really is just to, I guess, start these conversations, but more so to also say, you know, these are the topics and you want to know a person's thoughts on it. So I guess a way of getting to know the other person that you're playing the game with. So this is something that I can appreciate. Games like this, you know, I've seen them being used in different settings. You know, people who are relationship counselors, I've seen marriage counselors use them, you know, to assist the people that they're working with, you know, and they can be great conversation starters. And I get it. I get the overall point of the games and what they're supposed to do. And honestly, I mean, I think it's great, you know, because sometimes it can be hard starting conversations with people. So when you have these prompts, it's easy, and, you know, it makes it interesting, obviously, to hear what people think, and you can have a bit of a debate about it back and forth. So no fault with them whatsoever. The only fault that I have in particular here is, I suppose, this one question, the one that he was answering. It's one of those questions that I'm just like, I don't see what deeper conversation it could, you know, foster, because I can only see it going one way and landing in one way. And I almost feel that, you know, a different question should be asked, and overall just a different conversation should be had around this. But there are two interesting things that have happened since with this video. The first thing is that when you actually watch the video, you realize that Ezekiel isn't really answering the question, or I feel like he's not answering the question, because it just feels like he kind of goes on a bit of a tangent that I don't quite get, especially in regards to the question that's been asked. So I was like, okay. The second thing I realized is that when I went back to go look at the video again and, you know, read some of the comments and just to see, you know, people's take on it, I realized that it had been deleted, which I thought was very interesting. And I'm hoping that he, you know, brings the video back, or he uses another opportunity at another time to maybe discuss it further and kind of just, I guess, say what it is that he wanted to say about it. So about the question. So like I said, this video isn't about Ezekiel. It really is about this question. And when I saw this, the first thing that popped into my mind, and why I realized I didn't like it, is that it felt very much like it was victim blaming. That's the thing that I got from this question. Because when you ask to say, you know, does the MeToo movement expose the realities of misogyny, or is it a scapegoat, you know, for women and their lack of judgment? What I'm hearing you ask is to say that when a woman is raped, violated, harassed, and abused, you know, if it's due to her lack of sound judgment, you know, now this movement has been created as a way for her to scapegoat the fact that she exercised lack of judgment, and that's why, you know, the abuse and the violation and the rape happened to her, which I'm like, that is awful. The thing that kind of irritates me generally about these types of questions or topics or, you know, discussions that people want to have is that we have had these discussions before many times, and we've all come to realize that a person's sound judgment is not going to do anything to stop a predator. A predator is going to do what they want to do. So it's not about whether or not, you know, a woman has exercised sound judgment. And like I said earlier, by posing this question, you know, it places the fault squarely on the victim, because it's almost asking the questions of like, you know, where did you go? You know, what were you wearing? You know, what time of the night was it? Like, how much did you drink? All of those questions. Because if you really think about it, those questions, what they're asking is, should you have gone there? Should you have been wearing that? Should you have been drinking that? Should you have been there out, you know, at that time of night? So here's the problem. And what I mean when I say we've talked about this so many times is that women do everything they're told to protect themselves. We literally do each and every single thing that we can to protect ourselves, and more will still be asked of us. More will still be asked of us when we are violated, to say, you should have, you could have, or what about? And it gets a little annoying because anytime this conversation happens, at no point does anyone just start and end the conversation by saying, hey man, here's a thought. don't violate women. I feel like that's pretty simple. That's pretty standard. But it almost is like that's never what we hear. I mean, even consider, the never-ending discussion about clothing and how women dress, and I've heard this enough in church circles and even with some of my Christian friends that it gets brought up a lot, this idea of modesty and, how a woman dresses. What I've realized about this conversation around how a woman dresses and, modesty is that all of it after a while starts to become a value judgment on the woman, right? It starts to become a thing of like, you won't be taken seriously, or, you won't find a husband because no man wants a woman who ... Like that's even a threat, but okay. And the truth is, I never hear these conversations being had with men. I never hear the conversations being said, men, why do you feel the need to violate women? Or men, why are you violating women? I never hear those conversations. But the conversations are always around, what a woman is doing or what she shouldn't be doing. And again, it just falls squarely on her shoulder and I'm bored. Because at this point, it's just tired. It doesn't accomplish anything. So with everything that's happening in the world, we get to the point where we realize that it really is not about what the woman was doing, what she was drinking, who she was with, or what she was wearing. Because we know that when a woman is modest, and even when she exercises sound judgment, she still gets violated. So it's clear that that's not what is the issue here. And really, that's not what we should be focusing on at all. Because here's the hill on which I'm willing to die. That no matter how a woman is dressed, modest or not, and whether she's exercising sound judgment or not, still doesn't mean that she should be violated at all. Like, I simply do not care. There's never going to be a situation or a set of circumstances that make it okay for a woman to be violated. There's never going to be a time where we sit and we're like, yeah, she really shouldn't have worn that, or yeah, she really shouldn't have gone there, or oof, that time of night, yikes. There's never going to be a situation or a circumstance where that is ever going to be something that I agree with, because I don't think that that is true. Here's another issue that I took with that card. When it said scapegoating. Awful. Absolutely awful. Because it's saying that, a woman blaming others for their wrongdoing. Because that's what scapegoating means. When you scapegoat is when you've done something wrong, but you want to put that on other people. You want to make other people responsible for that. So again, in the context of this question being asked, I'm like, what wrongdoing have women done? Like, what is it that women are trying to, get away with? What's the wrongdoing here? Like wearing the clothes that you want to wear, going out where you want to go out, like having the drinks that you want to drink. Like, what is the wrongdoing here? Like, what is it that women are supposedly trying to get away with? And really not to like hop on too much about clothing, but we know that it's true that even when women dress modest, men will still find a way to sexualize women. They'll still find a way to violate women and to harass women. So again, that's what I'm saying, that none of this, even this talk of sound judgment, right, because it's wrapped around things like where did you go, blah blah blah, none of this has anything to do with that. Because regardless of what a person is doing, that doesn't mean that it should lead to the actions of them being violated, is the point that I'm making. So whatever you're wearing, whatever you're drinking, who you're hanging out with, where you're going, whatever time it is, none of that therefore equals the violation. That is never going to be what it is. Because let's say even after you read this question, you come up to the answer that says yes, that you feel like MeToo movement and any movement really, and all the conversations that are being had, it's women scapegoating their lack of judgment. If you answer yes to that, to me, you're saying that the MeToo movement, and all of the things that women have been talking about and things that women are fighting about, none of that is real. You're saying that misogyny is not real. You're saying sexism, none of those things are real, right? Because you're saying that if women exercise the sound judgment, none of this would be happening, right? So if women exercise the sound judgment, they wouldn't be violated. Therefore, movements like MeToo or whatever else wouldn't exist. That's essentially what you're saying. That again, it falls on the women that if they acted right, these things wouldn't be happening to them. And I'm like, no. The evidence is overwhelming that is simply not true. The other thing for me though is that this falls very neatly in respectability politics, right? So this idea that if you are respectable in your speech, how you conduct yourself, the things that you wear, where you go, etc., that certain things will not happen to you, right? And so for a lot of men, they also like to put women into this category, to say, well, if you are like this and like this and like this, these are the things that you will get. This is how you will be rewarded, and even the women that, have been deemed patriarchal princesses, they hold on very dearly to this idea that if I am like this and I present myself like this is the way that I'll be rewarded. And the women who don't do these things under respectability, this is the way that they rewarded. So that's why when things happen, we ask the questions of like, where were you, what were you wearing, so we can gauge whether or not you were being respectable in that time. So we can also gauge that when this thing happens to you, we're like, well, you shouldn't have been wearing that, you shouldn't have been going there, and that's the other thing that I don't like about it, is that it really just smacks of respectability politics. But again, like I say, we know it's not true, because even the ones who are the most whatever still experience violation. And again, it's really not the point. So initially when Ezekiel put up this video, he captioned it by saying, should victims be challenged? Which, yikes. But he also said that, it was something that he, I guess, wasn't going to give a definitive answer right now, which is why I'm hoping that, later on he will come back and, I guess, give his stance on this. The thing that I realized for me, right, because again, we're talking in the Christian context here, that's how this conversation is being framed, is that I realized that there are bigger spiritual consequences to what we're seeing happening, to the way that men are being, right? So earlier on when I was saying that, women are afraid of men, and it's factual, it's true, right? Because in the face of overwhelming evidence, it's understood why women would feel the way that they feel in the presence of men, why they would be scared and terrified. Because the truth is, when women are attacked and they're violated, it changes their view on men, it alters their perception on men, right? And it's completely understandable. It's understandable why women get to a point where they are terrified of men, they want nothing to do with men, even why something like men are trash is a thing. And I'm not going to get into that. I'm really not. But it's in the face, again, of overwhelming evidence where women are like, look at what we have to deal with here, at the hands of these men. So I 100% understand. Since we're talking about this from, I guess, the Christian perspective, I'm not going to talk about the crime element of this, because we all understand it, abuse and all of that. I'm not going to talk about the crime element at all. What I am interested in talking about, though, is the sin element. So when I talk about the sin element here, what I'm really referencing to is that God has a design, right? So when you read in Genesis, God has a design for the idea of marriage and how man and woman are supposed to come together. God has a design, God has a plan, right? We read that in the Bible. And it's clear then that when men are acting the way that they're acting towards women and children, it absolutely goes against the design that God had intended for. And that's why I say that there are actual big, deep spiritual consequences for the way we are seeing men conduct themselves in relation to women and children, when they are not being protectors, when they're not being providers, when they're not doing all of the things that God is expecting of men to do. And what I truly believe is that God's design is for men to see women as fellow Christ image bearers, right? To be treated with respect and with honor and with dignity, right? I also believe that God designed and intended men to have their masculinity and their manhood firmly defined and firmly placed in God and in nothing else. And I think what we're seeing happening now is the consequence of, men not being rooted in God. And the truth of the matter is, as far as I'm concerned, the way that men are treating women when they violate them, when they abuse them, when they're doing all of these things, is really men sinning against God. So again, when I talk about design, right? So when we go in Genesis, we see that God created Adam first, right? So he was the first of his kind, right? So almost like the head of the human race. He was the absolute first. But then we also realize that when you go through Genesis, that when God placed Adam in the garden, God gave him responsibilities. in that garden, that he was going to look after it, he was going to tend to it, he was going to protect it, he was going to work hard in the garden. God gave Adam a set of responsibilities and a set of things to do. Because to me, here's the fact: when a man obeys the word of God in how he lives, in how he treats people, in him being righteous, in him exhibiting his strength in Christ, in him relying on Christ in all things, that is the mark and the definition of a man. That is what I define as peak manhood, right? Because even when we talk about masculinity, as far as I'm concerned, masculinity is something that is given by God. Masculinity is something that is given by God, and it's something that is to be lived out biblically, and not in the way that it's been perverted and given this weird, worldly, selfish, I guess, toxic definition that we're seeing now. And I think that's why when people talk about toxic masculinity and how fragile it is, it's because none of it is rooted in the things that it's supposed to be rooted in. It's all based in these very shallow, random things that really have nothing to do with what makes a man truly a man. And that's why I say that for me, it is when it is rooted in the word, and it's rooted biblically, and it is lived out in that way, that we can say that is the definition of masculinity. Not all these other things that we're seeing men come up with, because all of that stuff, that's not what it really is. And that's why it's so easy for it to be picked apart and to be made fun of, if you will, because it's simply not real. Like things like, when men cry, you're not a real man. I'm like, where did you get that from? So this conversation for me, and when I think about what it really truly signifies, is that men have really fallen far from God's design of how they are supposed to be as men. Because even with this question, right? Because even outside of this whole, sound judgment thing, the question should be asked to say, how have we gotten to the point as a society that movements like MeToo, that these conversations are happening, and we're seeing the stats that we're seeing? How have we gotten there, right? And maybe what is the conversation that we should be getting to say, these are now the things that we should be addressing, not about what a woman was wearing and, the time it was when she went to go visit her friend. That is not the conversation that should be had. And that's why I'm saying that I would be more interested in the conversations that say, okay, why are we seeing the things that we're seeing? Men, let's talk about it. Let's actually address these things, and let's actually work on them with real tangible solutions. Let's learn things. Let's unlearn things. Let's realize that the way the world has defined what a man does, and how he shows his strength and that he can just take things or whatever it is not the way God intended and designed it to be. And I say all of this because, again, it's with the frame of Christianity that we're looking at this, right? Even with Ezekiel's platform, that's kind of the point, and he's asking this to other Christians and other believers. And that's why I'm saying that is the conversation that I want us to start having, not this other one. I say, this has deeper and bigger spiritual consequences, because the fact of the matter is, when men fall out of the design of how they're supposed to be, the way God intended, and they step away from God's word, and then after stepping out of God's word and just conducting themselves the way that they want to, and how they treat women and children, women are now left saying, we want nothing to do with men. The way men are absolutely horrible, they're terrible. All of that disrupts the design that God had in Genesis. And that's what I mean when I say that the consequences here are big. All of that, it disrupts it. And for me, and I get it, people might just be like, well, why am I just blaming the men? Well, I'm like, because it's on you. That's why I'm having this conversation, is to say that it is on you. Because for as long as you don't, and for as long as you act the way that you act towards the people that you're supposed to look out for and protect, and then those people say that they want nothing to do with you, and that men are horrible, and that whatever it may be, it goes against the design. So we have to ask ourselves, where is the starting place? And it starts with y'all. I mean, you may not want to hear it, but it's true. And for the people who do want to be having that conversation, about women and modesty and sound judgment and all of those other things, that's fine. You can have that conversation, but I hope it's a conversation that's just being had in that container, and not thinking that by talking about that and by addressing that it's going to fix the larger issue, because it's not, because that's not the cause of it, right? Because we should ideally be getting to a point where, regardless of all of those things, nothing happens to women, because men are realizing that that does not give them the justification, it doesn't give them the right. So I guess my answer to that question is, you know, is the Me Too movement exposing the realities of misogyny? Yes. The other part of the question wasn't necessary, because women are not scapegoating anything, and we've come to know and realize that it's got nothing to do with sound judgment. So thank you guys for watching this video, and that is my take on this. I would very much love to hear what you guys have to say about it. And this is a topic that I've written about quite a bit on my blog, so I'm just going to link a couple of blog posts where I talk about this from a Christian perspective, you know, biblical masculinity and femininity as well. So I talk about this, so I'll put the links down below so you can check those out. But I really am curious to hear what it is that you guys have to say. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.